Good day, ma'am. My name is DANICA Amolat from BSHM 2A, and for this video is I'm going to report about the chapter 7 in organizational management, which is the organizing the physical facilities. But before we start in reporting, let us read the objective first. So first, we will be able to learn the different organization facilities, and next we will be able to know the best choice of the community for the plant. And the third is we will able to understand the selection of erection of buildings, and lastly, we will be able to know the different types of the buildings. So we have here the first slide. So the physical facilities of an industrial enterprise consist of first the manufacturing plant, second the building and premises, and third the machine and equipment necessary to make a product or range of products in the quantities desired. In the organization of the facilities, um, the following main steps are required. So first we have the selection of plant location, and B, selection and erection of buildings, and C, selection of the equipment, and D, plant and machine layout, and E, installation of the equipment. And now let us discuss it one by one. So first we have the selection of the plant location. The decision as to location of vital effects on the success or failure of the operation of such plant. The decision therefore should be based upon a careful consideration of all the factors pertinent to the particular enterprise, and the nature of the factors involved in the plant location varies among industries and with changing technical and economic condition. And some industries in the location of the necessary plants are influenced by markets, and others are located around the sources of powers. Still, others seek the source of raw materials. And moving on to the next slide, we have here determining the region. Determining the region in which the plant is to be located requires consideration of five prime factors, namely, first we have proximity to market. So there has been established a relationship between the centers of population and manufacturing, relationship indicating that industry in general tends to seek its market, and that tendency of a plant to locate near its market has been evident. And second, we have the proximity to necessary materials, and the raw material is a factor of production in very vital to consider when processing removes considerable waste. For example, it is much cheaper to manufacture cement at the place where raw materials are. So those our cement plants are in Cebu, La Union, and Rizal, very near to the limestone mines where the raw materials came from. And another good example that may be mentioned is the meat packing industry located at Chicago or Kansas City in the United States. And third, we have here the transportation facilities, and if the business requires continued transportation, either of raw materials in or finished products out, or both, the convenience of transportation facilities has a real bearing on the economical conduct of the business. And fourth, we have the adequate public and private services such as water, power, fuel, gas, etc. Manufacturing thrives in an area where the supply of power and water is plentiful, as illustrated by the following. First, the manufacture of fertilizers requires the location near at the supply of power, and second, the huge public water power projects of the Tennessee Valley and in several American western states are indicative of importance of the adequate power to success industrial economy. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the climate. So the climate is an certain industries that nature of the climate, temperature, and humidity, and it is a factor that assumes considerable importance. And the manufacturer of shoes in Marikina, Rizal, for example, prefers a moist climate because he does not wish the leather that he uses to dry out rapidly. Moving on to the next slide, we have here determining the community. Once the general area of region has been determined, the selection of a particular community is next. And the best choice of a community for the plant depends upon the following consideration. First, we have labor, supply, and second, we have wage scale, and C is other enterprises in the community, and D, taxes and restricting laws. And now let us discuss the labor supply. The labor supply means the number of skilled and unskilled persons available for the kind of work to be done. And this factor is often more important than all other factors, especially when skilled labor is required. And the watch industry is concentrated in Switzerland because children often follow in the footsteps of their parents. So those assuring sample sources of skilled labor, the shoe industry in Marikina, wood carving in Pate, doors and windows in Taytay, and wooden shoes in Bifian can be traced to labor supply. And it is very essential that the required kind of labor should be available as needed and at reasonable rates of wage. And there must be ready supply, especially so at the time of business expansion. And the third one, other industries in the community. Oftentimes, competing or complementary enterprises in a community influence the decision of the selection of a plant site. And as a good example of complementary industry is we have the mining industry and the machinery industry, whereby the former produces materials which are converted into pig iron, which in turns is manufactures into tools and machineries by the later to be used by the first industry. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the fourth one, which is the industrial attitude of community. The attitude and cooperatives of the community as a whole are of some importance. A community beset with labor unions, strike, factions, and inter-union squabbles or politics does not generate a healthy atmosphere in which new plants are encouraged to settle, and those companies settle down in Makati or Mandaluyong and avoid other suburban towns or cities where they claim they do not get enough police protections. And moving on to the next slide, we have here the fifth one, which is the taxes and restricting laws. Provincial and towns legislation are also important, and the corporation laws are more stringent in some countries than in others, and some enterprises located in a particular country almost for the reason alone those many American vessels fly the flag of the Panama, and many French corporations organized in Monaco. Wage and work hour legislation, Joes, as well as local restriction in ordinances are typical or legislative factor that point to the state and community attitude towards the industry. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the choosing the plant site. After determining the region and the community in it, the final step is of course and the selection of the exact plant site in the community with the following factors to be considered. So first, the land. And in the search for site, the principal consideration is the land. Either it is a sample in size including room for expansion, and B, transportation and other factors, and second in importance in the transportation, whether the site is readily accessible to rail, motor, water, or air transportation as may be required. And this could be the employees, for instance, reach the place even with or without transportation of their own, and will the road enable an easy entrance of raw materials and supplies and easy exit of the products. And C, we have the miscellaneous condition pertaining surroundings, and the third factor has something to do with the surroundings of the site relative to the following questions. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the selection and erection of buildings, and the choice of the building depends upon its suitability to the nature, purposes, and requirements of the business. Heavy manufacturing, for instance, calls for strong or sprawling buildings, while a retail store needs a situation that will allow adequate display of merchandise, and an office, on the other hand, requires light and air and freedom from unnecessary noise. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the types of building. So there are two basic types of building, namely the single story building and the multi-story building, and each offers certain definite advantage that the relative merits of which should be weighed with respect to the requirements of the enterprise, and those involves the advantages of single story over multi-story. So first, we have here the advantage of single story over multi-story. First, greater ease of expansion through extension to existing building is made possibly. And second, there is less vibration where sensitive equipment and material are employed together with heavy machinery. And third, the soil requirements for the foundation are less severe. And next, we have here the advantage of multi-story over single story. So ganiha is single story over multi-story. Karon, multi-story over single story na ta. So first, more efficient use of land space, particularly where the space is limited or expenses can be had. Where a business cannot spread out, it can always go up. And second, lower cost of construction per square foot of floor space in other advantage, and the upper floor are often mere repetition of the lower floors. And third, it is cheaper to heat because of less roof and other space through which heat can escape, and it is also cheaper to cool where air conditioning is necessary. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the present trends in building construction. Allied with the present trend towards the location of plants is suburbans areas in the trend towards the reaction of the single-story building, and flexibility of plant layouts and lower routine and materials handling costs, among other things, comprise strong inducements to management to erect single-story structures. Moving on to the next slide, we have here spacing of columns. The percent true on the spacing of columns is the direct of wider and higher interiors, and undoubtedly this trend has been influenced by increased need in recent years for flexibility to meet rapidly changing condition in manufacturing. And moving on to the next slide, we have here the use of basement. The basement and sub-basement are being used more and more for the storage of raw materials. For example, lead storage for services, tunnels, and for employee serving facilities. And there are corridors through which employees pass on their way to and from the work above. Likewise, located in the corridors and the locker rooms, washrooms, and maybe in air-conditioned cafeteria, the use of the corridors prevents confusion and interference that occur during the change of work shift. And moving on to the next slide, we have here railings. One of the greater difficulties with solid concrete walls is their inflexibility in case of unavoidable changes. And next, we have roofings. The so-called roofings have deserved more preference or popularity than the flat roofs. And third, we have floorings. The present-day industrial buildings, especially those which have heavy machinery installation, require solid floorings. Moving on to the next slide, we have here plant illumination. Good illumination in a plant pays for itself in greater productivity, efficiency, improved morale of employees, fewer accidents, and better housekeeping. Light and paint, when used together, comprise a team which can vanish darkness, and one without other will only have to do the work. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the fluorescent lighting. There is a strong trend today in the direction of fluorescent lighting, and it is this type of artificial lighting most widely used by industry today, and which has replaced the incandescent light to a great extent. And the principle of fluorescent lighting is the glow produced by ultraviolet rays in a tube coated inside the fluorescent powder. And next, we have the color conditioning. The color conditioning is the phase of good plant illumination, and it is the interior painting. And the principal objectives of industrial color conditioning is to achieve uniform brightness but sufficient contrast, and that the job will appear more interesting in the employee's eyes than in surrounding area. And it was found that a can of paint could salvage many foot candles of light, and it is well known fact that white paint reflects from 74 to 19% light. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the plant layout and design. The plant layout and design deals with the physical arrangement of factories, plants, warehouse, offices, and laboratory areas and commercial establishments. And this arrangement involves equipment and the people and their workplace, the supporting services, utilities, auxiliaries and communication and control equipment, and the building itself. And a fault that layout may slow up the work and may require unnecessary movement of the work. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the objectives of plant layout. Making a layout plan is not the end result even of those responsible for the planning. Rather, improve operation, increase outputs, reduce costs, better service to customers, and convenience and satisfaction for the company personnel are likely to be the chief objectives. Moving on to the next slide, we have here plant layout fundamentals, and it is probably impossible to achieve all the benefits of good facility in any one plant. By its very nature, a plant facility involves a multitude of factors and consideration: products, materials, sales volume, people, buildings, services, utilities, and like all this must be blended into a facility that will give the greatest benefit and have the fewest limitation. Moving on to the next slide, we have here the types of layouts, and there are three so-called classical types of layout. First, we have fixed position or function and product or function, and produced or production line. So first, we have fixed position. Also, the chef's material is one place and brings men and machines to it, and this layout is generally most economical when the product or material is physically large and heavy, and the quantity of each item is small, and the process is also simple. And the second one we have here, the process layout, and is generally most economical when the process or nature of the operation is relatively complex or costly, and the products or materials are diversified or variable, and the quantities as each item are relatively few. And the last one, we have the product layout or line production, and it is generally most economical when the quantity is large and the process is fairly simple, and the product or material is relatively standardized, constant, and not too large. And moving on to the next slide, we have here financial feasibility. And from the overall financial position of the company, profit, incident, sales, level, debt, servicing, etc. means that the ability of project to achieve sufficient income, credit, cash flow to financially sustain the project over the long term and meet all the debt obligations.